decided they would do their homework and stay in school, and I was already being led astray by the muse of, creative music. In Harvard Square, there was a record store that even after a while began to sell like amplifiers and things like that, because music was starting to really be a powerful force among students all over the country, all over the world. This call of music, calling you away from the dreary drudgery it seemed that we had to assume this life of, well, my dad said that if I could be a diplomat, he would be happy. And I think music is the great diplomacy all over the world. But in that record store, you could go to a booth, you could take an album, and so I started out with Leadbelly, and his song "In the Pines." I mean, black girl, don't lie to me. It's the same as "In the Pines." So on the same day, I was listening to Leadbelly sing that. Then I found this Bill Monroe record, and he's singing the same song, and singing it and there's harmony. Now, I mean, the blues is the first thing okay, John Henry. Again, Bill, you hear the blues version of John Henry, then you hear Bill Monroe's version of John Henry, and it kind of, I don't know if it was like a cultural thing, but it was more accessible to me. I could not fathom the blues, although the blues has always been a first love. Just recently, I finally recorded the first Lightning Hopkins song I ever heard, which is Penitentiary Blues. Whoa, big Brazos, here I come, But Bill Monroe absorbed the blues into his music. In fact, he told me that he took Flatt and Scruggs to New Orleans. He said, they were so green, I had to learn them something. Who knows what they learned him, but they were not green anymore. They were blue. And I think that's one of the reasons they saw that Bill was so, in those days, how do you define an originality? Now it's eclecticism, it's become that. And eclecticism with great finesse and technique. But in those days, it was like, this is beginnings of styles. And Bill really actually knew what he liked because he had been taught by a black guitarist, Arnold Schultz, and his uncle, Uncle Penn. That's where bluegrass came from. This is this sort of bluesy New Orleans, southern, real deep, as far south as you can go, and then the mountain fiddling. And everybody talks about the mountains. Now, some people do live in the mountains, but it's really hill country music. And it always comes from near rivers. There's always a river involved. And the Cumberland River that goes down by Nashville comes from Kentucky. They called it the Old Kentuck back in the old days. And then there was a trade route from Nashville to Natchez Trace, the Mississippi River. And so all these trade routes is where people started picking up songs. And, even that song, oh, Shenandoah, I love your daughter. That's an old riverboat song, that would be, that's what fascinates me is the connection of the rivers and the deltas to the birth of music and how it's generated. What was the question? No, I started, in my search, I found the Country Gentleman, and what really got me into bluegrass, as opposed to maybe I didn't have any racial consciousness, but the blues seemed so personal and so sophisticated, because most of it was played that I heard. Sonny Terry and Brownie McGee, I met them, but it's very intimate music. It wasn't like the Chicago blues kind of thing with the big harmonica and the rockin'. That came on with Paul Butterfield and Mike Bloomfield, who were just like me, but they happened to be in Chicago. And they were picking up the blues in Chicago, the electric blues. So here you are in Massachusetts, well, where's the connection with the music? Well, I heard the Country Gentleman, And that led me to the Osborne brothers. And I have two brothers. So I'd go listen to these records, and I'd come home, I'd buy them, I'd come home, and I'd make my brothers learn the harmony parts. So we had a trio. I mean, really, and it's the first time I really thought about that. That was a big connection because of the harmony. And we used to go into Uncle George's parties, Labor Day parties up at Screwball Terrace. We used to sing in the car. And my parents loved the fact that their three kids weren't fighting and were singing in the back seat. You know, there's 5 years between us, and Chris and Lauren still play as a duet out in California. They were, they had a record deal at Columbia Records, and David Grisman was their producer. So I mean, so when I heard the country, I started learning that, and I tried to sing like John Duffy, you know, because I thought that the high emotional tenor was good. But what really fascinated me was that guitar playing of Charlie Waller. So when I left, I was at Colgate University, and I had a little band up there called the Bonnie Hill Boys, because there was a hill called Bonnie Hill nearby. And I mean, nobody, first of all, anybody heard the music thought it was just from another planet. And so one of the things that differentiated me from the coffee house scene was because I played bluegrass, who was the audience? You know, college kids didn't care. You know, the Beatles were coming on, and you know, and so in upstate New York at that time, and maybe somebody here remembers this, there was a huge country music scene, and there were lots of bands, no fiddlers, very few fiddlers. There was one fiddler, and he joined in with us, but the audience dressed up like Loretta Lynn and Porter Wagoner. It was and the musicians were little vests, you know, little bow ties, and you know. But the bands were fantastic bands, and they could have been brought in from somewhere. But young musicians in the farming communities of upstate New York were devoted to this country music style, which would have been about 1959, 1960. But it was the audience that dressed up like the stars. You know, they all had like the nudie suits, frolically prom dresses, and you know, and they were a great crowd. And it was a Sunday thing with the food laid on, and everybody danced. And we, these little college kids in our little vests, and you know, and bow ties, because bluegrass, you know, the little string ties, or as one of my friend calls it, the idiot tie. It's like, you know, it's just a joke. It's a joke. but nobody cared about this music at all. The only gigs we could find were for country people. I mean, upstate New York was agricultural, many farms. That's all anybody had. There was no industry up there. So we were students, of course, and you know, the obligations of being a student. You know, I was determined I was going to be a student. You know, like, because my granddad was paying for it. I mean, he made it able for me to go to school. And I just remember it didn't matter how many people were in the audience. I mean, I'm thinking right now of this little bar in south of Hamilton, New York, Casanova, or this little town. There's a theater up there now, and they do great shows. But it's a little town south of Hamilton. And on a Sunday night, which is the only night they allowed us to go out and play in that bar with no microphones, 4-piece bluegrass band. And I've heard tapes that we actually were learning. We were really getting it. You know, we were singing, you know, imitating, but singing, you know. And there was this one guy, Charlie, and we used to sing this old time tune. Charlie's neat, Charlie's sweet, Charlie, he's a dandy. Charlie loves to kiss the girls and feed them all on candy. Well, Charlie would get off that bar stool and do the wildest, craziest dance you've ever seen, and then lay down on the floor. So, I mean, that's my first audience there. But I do think that you know, and then back in Boston, the only real bluegrass place, and it was a bluegrass place, was the Hillbilly Ranch. And the Lilly brothers were there. And Don Stoker had been with Bill Monroe, and he was playing banjo. And I was underage. You know, you had to be, in those days, 21 to go in a bar. That's a long time to wait when you can't even, thank goodness for the coffee houses, because you could go and hear Muddy Waters, you know, in from Chicago with a full band in a coffee house like the Club 47 and be 12 years old. You know, you could be exposed to great music in those days. And of course, the bars, you know, that was a whole other thing, but it was those coffee houses that allowed you to sit at the feet of the greats. Mississippi John Hurt, yeah, Sonny Terry and Brownie McGee.
So Peter, I know you've probably told this story many, many times.